Okay, so Mr. Kant, I'll start with you. Let's grab the bull by the horns and ask what have been the issues in the last 1.5 years with respect to remote working?
Before that, I would like to say that actually uh, I was not in favor of work from home. I was not a person who I was a firm believer that it doesn't improve productivity. But believe me, these were discussions 2 years back when we were pre-COVID. We were discussing with our people manager. But thanks for Business World and all of the panel that I got a chance to explain that what happened in last 1.5 year, that complete thought process, the way we work has changed. And so obviously this remote working came as a necessity. It was not an option. If option being there, probably the same type of discussion would have been happening with the people manager. Just because it came with necessity, and we were not having options to go for it. So if you know all our finance functionals and managers were always looking for a digitalization of processes. Last 3-4 years they were working especially on these things, but nobody has imagined that it will happen on a sudden day and we'll have to completely shift into these processes. Before, I would like to add that what are the challenges we have faced within this transition. The thing which remote things takes away from a normal offline working is a physical connect and physical record verifications. Whatever physical connect were there was completely missing. We also know that in remote working, whatever brainstorming sessions happening or cross-functional interactions were happening, they got impacted. So just to tell that what was the challenges that we face is probably the departments or the sub-functions in finance who were more dependent on these 3 parameters, 2 or 3 parameters of physical connect, got impacted largely. But the processes where they were already on ERP functions, say for the reporting function, they were least impacted because anyway they work on ERP models. It doesn't matter that from which system they are working on or which area they are working from those reporting processes. But yes, if you talk about invoicing part, ARAP part, that got impacted because we were still dependent on a physical document. So that's how probably I would say that the impact and the struggle was mixed bag. The areas which were automated. So if you remember, and this is another time that we're discussing from last so many years in so many panels, finance fraternity is talking about that we should have to become digital, we'll have to go to automations. So those firms and organizations who did this earlier was least, they were not impacted much, but those who were lagging behind those processes will have to do a lot of things. And unfortunately, the period of COVID starting was also not great. It was just bang on when we were going for year end as in March 20. So yeah, that sudden change, how to convince auditors, how to give them documentation. So that definitely was a challenge that those 1.5 months gone through a phase, but that was a phase, and probably last 1.5 year has given us so much of learning and how we can enhance all those processes. Two important things also happened, and I would add it to challenges. And I will agree that most of the finance fraternity and IT fraternity will understand that when it started in April 20, a lot of firmware attacks started happening on company, their databases. And I'm not going to blame China in context, but definitely there were a lot of firm attacks happening. So that point of time, I know a lot of my colleagues face a difficulty that complete data got evaporated or complete database got hanged. So at that point of time, probably the companies who had a better firewalls or SD-WAN capabilities that they would have. So that was a new challenge that we've suddenly seen, and that particular phase itself. The other challenge was definitely health of employees and their family members. So whenever any such instance was happening, as a manager, we'll have to take a call that, okay, fine, now this person is not well, but the work must go on, and how we should make sure that segregation of duty also remains same, but the yet work also continues. So these were the very evolved challenges were coming up, and when this transition of remote working had started.
Yes, Mr. Kant, as they say that necessity is the mother of all invention, and in the last 1.5 years, we have all been forced to step up our technological game, so to say. In a similar context, Ms. Sharma, I would like to direct a question towards you. How is Schneider coping with the work from home situation? What has been its financial impact, and plan to do about? So, Mr. Batra, I'll direct a similar question towards you. What is Crompton Greaves doing to make the entire workforce inclusive and minimize the financial losses?
So I think it's been nearly 18 months since it started, and we've seen the whole cycle and maybe twice over. So I think when it first started, it last year in March or April, it was quite obviously for all of us. It was sudden. Nobody was prepared for it, and this happened at the peak of our business cycle. We are a summer company, right? Our products like fans and air coolers are all largely sold in the summer period. So we were at that time confronted with inventory, no demand, didn't know what to do, working capital shot through the roof. So obviously the first 3 months was all about ensuring survival, which was about what costs can you cut, how much cash can you conserve, what more can you do to bolster your balance sheet so that the business does not get disrupted. But quite honestly, we were very surprised by the pace of recovery that happened after that. So if you look at the second half of the calendar year, starting July, August, we saw fantastic recovery and growth rates in quarters of the type we haven't seen. And that gave us a lot of confidence in two things. One, the resilience that the economy might have, and B, the ability of the corporation to deal with shocks. So therefore, when the second wave happened this time in March, April, I would say we were far, far better prepared. And we did 3 things, which I would like to talk about. One, of course, is we ensured utmost safety for our employees. So we said nobody needs to come to office unless it is mandatory. So for example, in a production setup, the person does need to come to the factory. Otherwise, how will you produce the product? But there we also use technology to track employees to ensure that social distancing, etc., was being maintained in the factory. Second thing, and to further give comfort to employees, we took additional measures like extra insurance to take care if anybody unfortunately were to contract COVID. Did vaccination drives for our employees. But for the business and for the company, given our experience of last year, we did not cut back on any costs. So we continued to invest in the peak of the second wave, as unlike what we did last year. Similarly was the approach towards cash. We said, look, we are very confident of the resilience in the country and in the company. So therefore, we should ensure no disruption. So even when the second wave came, again, unfortunately, at the peak of our business cycle, we ensured that for our vendor ecosystem, many of them are small vendors, we did not have any disruption. So we continued to sum up business as usual, even at the peak of the second wave.
Yes, business as usual. The key challenge when we talk about the COVID period, a lot of businesses are just trying to stay afloat. This brings me to Mr. Arora. I wanted to ask you that we are, as far as gas and oil is concerned, we are a logistics heavy industry. And logistics in India is largely an unorganized sector, which is yet to come under government regulation completely. How were you able to manage to keep afloat financially in an era of remote working, where logistics was one of the key issues?
See, as far as oil and gas industry is concerned, the logistics is mainly to pipelines. Even in my company, that's into the city gas distribution, and most of the supplies, or 95% of the supplies, are through gas pipelines. So as far as that is concerned, that was not a challenge at all. The challenge had been different: how to service the customers in case of a complaint with a domestic customer. Now, on the one side, customer says you are not allowed to enter in. On the other side, there's a gas leakage, how you control it. And the strict guidelines were laid down, how to handle those. And those are all customers were serviced. And we were saying, if it's a normal complaint, very, something which is not urgent, don't call us. If it is something very serious, do call us. Routine activities should not be called. that was in the month of April it happened. So as far as supply chain, the biggest challenge that we got it was the movement of the vehicles, because it was a complete lockdown in the wave 1, where our CNG sales dropped significantly. But the good part, what has happened, that was the industry supply to industry went up during this period itself, because industries were not getting fuel because there was a logistics problem. Whereas our supply was through pipelines. We gained substantially over these 18 months in terms of the number of customers, in terms of the volume, the size of the business that we have it today. I think currently we are more in a capex mode. We are growing. We have lined up capex of about 15K CR for the next 5 to 8 years. Every year we're spending about 1,500 CR around. Therefore, the challenge had been very, very different, and we have gained substantially. I think in terms of customer base, it has gone 3x over the last 1 year in terms of the industrial customers itself.
Right. We seem to have Ms. Sandhya Sharma back on panel. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Let me direct the earlier question to you back again. What is the innovation that Schneider Group is undertaking to make remote learning, not remote learning, although we are all learners, I would say remote working more inclusive and easy for everybody, so that it does not hamper the financials of the company overall?
Urvi, in terms of, I would say, digitization and innovation, we were quite ahead of the league, and that helped us to kind of move into pandemic easily. From finance perspective, from business perspective, of course, we are installing elevators and escalators, and that means we need to be physically available. From innovation perspective, from finance, we already had digitized quite a lot of processes, so it made it easier for us to work from home. Till now, we have not started yet working from office full-fledged. A couple of people who go for their own personal reasons, but we still are remotely working. What we have done to accelerate is we are moving into a captive shared service, which helps to kind of take all the learnings together and really accelerate the whole learning amongst the colleagues and the processes, which we have started during the pandemic. It started practically last year, April. Secondly, we are arranging a lot of training sessions for upskilling the colleagues that we have in terms of what is the new age requirement and how we can work to ensure that they are not felt left out. Plus, they help the organization into innovation.
Right. Mr. Singh, my next question stemming from this one regarding inclusivity and better connectivity is directed towards you. R30 Little is essentially an American-based company, and as we know that US is a capital-intensive market. So given that fact, what is it that they're doing right about remote connectivity, since it's been a reality and will probably be for most of us for some time for now, that we can imbibe in the market as well?
Urvi, in fact, we operate in India as a company which is transnational, but I think company likely not getting this. Your question is more sluggish somehow.
Right, there seems to be some connectivity issue at my end. In a nutshell, I was asking, what are the good business practices that US has imbibed when it comes to remote working that the Indians can take into?
I think Indian business and the practices that we have, as Indian, we have shown more resilient than the rest of the world. I think the kind of challenges that we faced here and the way we resurrected everything is actually an example for the rest of the countries to look at. There are things to learn, obviously, to replicate in the more matured economy, the way they are dealing things on digital platforms, the way they are leveraging technologies, the way they are connecting with their employees. And also, I think my friend from Quantum Leaps has also mentioned about that they took care of the employees. This is mostly some of the practices which US companies are predominantly doing. And we obviously have some learning to really replicate from what companies in US have. not limited to US. I think many of the matured economy, they took care of their employees. For them, healthcare and the well-being of their employees were utmost care. So that I think most of organizations in India also did. Whether the lockdown was imposed or some organizations in India have taken a conscious call to take care of their employees, I think it is very, very visible today that we have now learned a new way of doing business. We really not to look for more economists telling us and teaching how to replicate things. We have done far better performance in terms of economic resurrection in India as well.
Okay, that's good to hear that India is leading when it comes to good business practices, and we are not holding back when it comes to increasing the base and the financials of any company over here. Another report I read of late that one of the key reasons why India is not developing the way it should is because women are not joining the workforce, or they are dropping out at a rapid pace. So, Ms. Sharma, I would like to ask you this: that how are you planning to keep the women on board during the pandemic, especially when we have heard that it is mainly the women who are quitting first? It is imperative for the financials of any company, and what are the steps you're taking?
Yeah, I would say I'm heading the inclusion and diversity committee in my organization, so it becomes all the more important for me to add to it. But on a personal level, I would say I have my LinkedIn tagline that I want 500 women I want to inspire 500 women to be their best versions, and through a tagline, if I can, you can. I see in an organization what you need is a top-down approach, because you cannot boil the ocean and cannot have multiple people down the line. But what we are doing is we are bringing in our industry also branch managers, field operations head who are women. These are acting as role model for more and more women to be established into the organization. Second, of course, there are all the policies which are oriented or helping them oriented towards ensuring that they stay. I would say further things what we are doing is we are adding a buddy concept, so that the women employees most of the time don't that is the concern, that they feel left out. So with the buddy concept, they are not feeling that. Another thing is we have quite a lot of forums where we drive this, that don't just leave because you're feeling the pain. Come, talk, let us discuss the challenges, because we probably cannot make policies across or encompassing all the challenges. So we are asking them to come ahead and understand that what are the challenges they are facing and how we can support them in that. But majorly the drive is to have a top-down approach, so that at the top, if the women are there, the other people definitely feel motivated. They see a role model in the organization which supports staying. Policies are there with many of the organizations, flexi working, crush facility. I don't think so we even need to mention them. All these are generally there. A thing which we are additionally doing is sensitizing the managers how to deal with it. Many times it is not the organization, it is not the policies, it is the person with whom you are working. And I think we are doing a lot over there in terms of sensitizing. Generally in field operations, it is a man's world overall in construction and construction related activities. So that overall is helping us to bind the female folks together in the organization.
That's really good to hear the number of steps that are being undertaken to promote inclusivity. Mr. Batra, I would like to direct the same question towards you. How is Crompton Greaves retaining its women workforce in the organization? Consequently, how is it impacting its finances?
I think personally, I've had a very, very successful experience of working with colleagues and with a team which is gender diverse. Just by way of statistics, of the 7 people who report into me, 3 happen to be women. So I'm a big champion of this. this whole diversity and inclusion. From a company level, of course, I think I don't want to repeat what Sandhya said, but all that is required to be done to make sure that women, and it's that women at all levels do feel welcome, do feel safe. All that we are doing. Obviously, the one area where I think most companies would I won't say struggle, but fail to meet any standards is in sales. But if I leave out sales function, which is the front end of every organization, I think in every other function, we are an equal opportunity employer. And as I said, in my team of direct reports, out of 7 folks, 7 who report to me, 3 happen to be women. Obviously, there is no question of any financial impact, positive or negative, as a result of that. But I think what is also now gaining ground is not just about gender diversity. I think this whole concept of diversity and inclusion is becoming a much bigger piece, and Crompton is now, I would say, taking initial steps to make the whole organization diverse and much more inclusive.
Mr. Kant, I have another question for you. Coming back to the core topic that is the agenda of the panel, I wanted to ask you that given that we are in an era of remote working, I'm speaking from home, and a lot of panelists here are also speaking from their respective houses. How has it impacted the financial control of a company? Do we still have a top-down approach, or is it now becoming a bottom-up approach?
See, actually, there is no much impact per se on control that has happened. As obviously, I was in my previous conversations also, I was talking about that, yes, there are some level of changes that we'll have to do to adopt to remote working. Some controls are required to be changed, and sometimes I was mentioning about segregation of duties. Sometimes we'll have to compromise on that because of that health of the team member and their family members. But apart from that, see, it's like that if you have a systematic and more system-driven controls, that doesn't change that from where you are working. So that's probably was that there was not much changes required in terms of control structuring. You need to add some additional controls because if people are working on different places, you don't know how the data is secured when they're working in different places. You don't know that who is looking into your particular finance data. So suppose and I'm sure the panel who have working listed companies, for them it also becomes very important that data as such or the numbers as such becomes doesn't get out because they are working in different businesses. So if they're working at home, it is very difficult to control that nobody's peeking into their laptop and looking into numbers. So at that prospect, I'm sure that some more controls would be required to ensure that the data breach is not happening, but the processes and the various controls and their risk mitigations is by and large remain same, either it is offline or on a remote mechanism. Here's one more thing that probably I have seen over the period that now, and that's not that related to control, but somewhere it is related that now the profiles are becoming more and more flatter. Earlier, suppose for a decision making, you need to interact with 2 people. Now, because that the 2 people are not sitting together, it is in benefit of the organization that they split those decision making parts and probably give one person one responsibility. So those types of thing is definitely is also linked with control, that how you are managing those responsibilities, segregation or shifting, a complete shift the profiles that you give it to them. Earlier, say, if we were only looking into competence of an employee and the job profile, now competence of employee, profile, and the emotional quotient of the employee also has to be taken care that is the employee is a person who wants to interact with a lot of people. He cannot work in isolation. So the job profile also has to be in a particular manner. So probably it's not about that control that we were having it. It has become more of a holistic and emotional angle, also a soft angle has to come into while you're determining that your controls are working fine or you need to make some changes.
Okay, so whenever we talk about financial decisions or any decisions, communication and transparency are one of the key issues that we come across. So, Mr. Arora, I would like to ask you this, given that we are living in a country which is not vastly connected by the internet, what are the internal communication challenges that you have faced in the last 1.5 years in terms of making the company run smoothly, and what are the measures you took to overcome?
This company, this organization is a growing organization. We have a strength of about 300 employees as far as finance team is concerned, and a very small team of 10 to 11. So I think everybody worked as a family. In case there is any problem to anyone, other has automatically taken charge and performed the work. I'm lucky from that perspective. I did not ask anybody else to do this work or that work. The team as a whole collectively kept on doing certain things. So that was a very, very positive, because I think the entire company, entire employees, I think they all worked as a family. In case somebody is down, and everybody had been looking for even the COVID wave 2, the beds for them, wherever they have their connections. So that was personalized support to everyone it was given. So therefore, we do face many challenges, but we were able to overcome. Plus, there was a support from the parent companies, Indian Oil as well as Adani. So there was as far as the framework was concerned, that was well laid down by them. And as far as we were concerned, we were more on the implementation mode, wherever we find we need any directions over there.
Okay, so given that we have the last 7 minutes in this panel, and I would like to ask one question which I would like everybody to answer, and you can answer it because we don't have too much paucity of time. Mr. Singh, we'll start with you. What is your lesson as a CFO in terms of running a company and generating finances that you have picked up in the last 2 years, let's say?
So I think this has been a period where lot of introspection is required. Okay, I think all the processes that we already had, we were given a review of everything, and we realized that there are some lacunas which we were not able to identify when we were in the normal days. Which, in terms of not only financial planning, but both way, finance works both way. So whether it is receivable or payable, we had to relook at everything. The normal daily sales outstanding of collecting our money from the market has really increased, because a lot of people, obviously, they had challenges of paying to the organization. At the same time, they were wanting to take the liberty of leveraging this entire pandemic as an opportunity for delaying the payment, and vice versa. So I think those key parameters of receiving payment and even also to make the payment is something which we have seriously reviewed and now changing our parameters of decision making. At the same time, second most important thing is that earlier those bills were required to be coming in person. There was a department who was deliberately working and checking on the hard copies. Over the time, we have realized that, okay, I think that entire process can be overlooked. So the digital copy or e-copy is fine for all the e-orders and everything. When we talk about using technology in this period, is a given lot of perspective that in organization, despite in today's time, we had a lot of processes which were indeed not required. So I would say it's an insightful journey that has been here. And second thing is more in terms of dealing with your employees, because their payout, their expenses and everything. Most of the companies, those who are into manufacturing or into the retail sales, have already leveraged using various apps in terms of their apps, attendance or their presence, their traffic, travel, everything. We are also doing the same thing. We have hired 35 plus consultants in the entire pandemic over last year. Most of them we have hardly met. So I think all the interviews from the elite institutes, their onboarding and everything has been done online. And let us see how this continues. But I think it's been a journey which is full of learning. And I hope this will continue for some more time.
Mr. Batra, what about you? What have your lessons been in the last 1.5 years as a leader in the financial world?
Yeah, I think I'll answer it in maybe 3 parts. First, of course, is a reaffirmation of the fact that cash is king. I think it was obvious that companies in the period of disruption, whichever had strong balance sheets, who had cash, were far better placed to deal with the situation than companies which may have been financially stressed. Second thing, also, it broke a lot of myths about that you can't digitization is not something that can be applied universally and so on and so forth. So that kind of myth got busted because companies had no choice but to adopt technical means. But I think as I look back, one thing that certainly became the mantra for us was about how do you deal with uncertainty, because I think the amount of uncertainty that got thrown up because of COVID, and the situation was changing every day, be it around your business, be it around your assets, be it around your employees. And mind you, all companies have textbook, what they call business continuity plans, emergency response plans, all of them have. But in a black swan event like this, something that has never been anticipated, no textbook has ever written it. How do you deal with situations like this? And that is, to my mind, the real test of management. And what this underscored was that companies which are agile in response, which are able to think on their feet and change course every day, every hour, if the situation so need be, will outlive companies which are more rigid and which don't have that agility. So to me, one underlying mantra has been that the agility of your response is far more important and critical than the accuracy of your forecast. Thank you.
We all had to improvise. I guess that is the key word for COVID, or we can put it as its middle name, as we say in movies. So, Mr. Kant, I would like to pose the same question to you in a slightly different way. What were the lessons from the first wave that you implemented in the second wave, and what will be the lessons from the second wave if, God forbid, we have a third one?
So probably whatever learning we had in first wave and now in second wave, and hopefully there is no third wave, that obviously business get impacted. Like as Mr. Batra was saying, that everybody was having a continuity plan, but these types of scenario was never part of anybody's continuity plan. So yes, it was impact suddenly, but probably I would like to add, and it's nothing new, that probably, and I have summarized the learning into 4 T's. Like first T is the treasury. When I'm saying treasury, it obviously, we were talking about cash is king and everything comes to the treasury department, and it was not only outflows, inflows, but also outflows will have to measure. So treasury was the one thing which was a learning in first wave, and second wave we were ready that if second wave comes, then how we are going to manage our cash, how we're going to have our vendors interactions, get a waivers or get a deferments of payment plans. So all those things we were ready, and I don't want to replicate that, but obviously that book is ready, that how to do it if third wave comes. The second T was obviously the team, that I've learned that communication has become even more important, that how you communicate with your team members, how you, if you want to getting work done also, it's a different way of interaction that you will have to do. They need a different sort of coaching. So all those learning, which was in first and second wave, that is probably going to learn, help a lot. The third T was a trust, which has become very important factor. That though I'm saying that communication comes on the team part, but the trust also sort of which played a very big role. That and the trust is all about, and it comes with optimism, that okay, I have a trust with you and I'm optimistic about business. You will keep on hearing from your employee that they are uncertain about businesses going with direction. So we have to ensure that the trust is there within the employee. And the fourth very important T, there was a transition. Be ready, as Mr. Batra said, agility to make a changes, whatever is happening in past, learn from that, be a quick responder to anything that are happening, transition towards digital mode of transactions. So all those things will have to very quick about those things. So probably these 4 T's is what I will write it down somewhere, that every time if wave 3, wave 4 comes, we have to just pull out it and start implementing.
If the 4 T's can be a very common business jargon now, I would encourage you to write it down and publish it somewhere, certainly.
Sure.
Before you wind up, Ms. Sharma, I would like to ask you, as a financial leader in your company, how have you been a guiding force to more profits and a sustainable future?
I would say a couple of things. First, implementing learnings from my mom. Managing a middle class household was all about ensuring that the right stakeholders are happy, costs are under control, there is something in some pocket available for some special things. So one is that. Second is I feel, and which is a continued treasure for me, a learning, a two rather from COVID, is the trust and relationship. And it is not only with others, it is with yourself as well. I started trusting myself more. I started trusting my gut feeling more, because there was no data available to fall back upon during decision making, to take decisions during this time. So I would say it is trust for myself, with peers, with field operations, with my team. That's excellent learning from COVID. Second is relationship building, which helps you drive your point, because as a finance person, I can't be crusader of everything at every field. It becomes a fighting spot, and I want that relationship to go smooth. So for me, it is trust, relationship, and learning of managing a middle class household has helped me and will continue.
Yes, self-belief is the first step and even the last step towards achieving anything and pushing yourself beyond your existing capabilities. So with that positive note, I would like to take your leave for the day. I would thank all our eminent panelists who are senior leaders in their own company and learned, experienced folks in their own right. Thank you so much for joining us, and it was a great interaction.